Oh, hi everyone. I'm the director for our New Zealand registered not-for-profit charitable trust called Common Knowledge. What a way to start, eh? We chose that name carefully, Common Knowledge. That meant we set up a trust that reached across all of our differences, all of our individuality, into what is common. We could do that in a number of ways, and one of the ways we did that was that I worked in the early 1970s with hundreds of mothers and fathers, and we developed the Birthing Better skills. And what was common about our births, we were all individuals, we were all interested in our own birth, we weren't particularly interested in anybody else's birth, but we shared something in common. And we shared it in common not because of our age particularly, or where we lived, or our thinking. We shared it in common because we were human beings. We're either pregnant or we're not as women, and if we're pregnant, we are in a group, an exclusive group. We're pregnant. And what happens to pregnant women? 100% of us have to give birth one way or another. So our trust is common knowledge, and the skills that fathers and mothers developed around pregnancy and childbirth are based on a human body. We all breathe, we all blink, we all cough, we can all tighten up our rectum. So today I want to talk about a very touchy subject, and that's about what the natural birth movement is. Now, before all of you jump down my throat, because I know you will, because since the early 70s, you have, okay? So I want you to know that the natural birth movement, for some of us, has been absolutely phenomenal. It's changed childbirth for us. We've had choices. We've had choices about the type of care we have. We've had choices about where we birth. We've had choices about birth professionals. However, when we think of ourselves, and if the natural birth movement has helped us have the birth we want, or helped us have a better birth, then the natural birth movement has been successful for us. So compare that to our trust, common knowledge. If the natural birth movement worked for your birth or for my birth, what about someone else's birth? What if it didn't work for their birth? And why wouldn't it have worked for their birth? Because the natural birth movement has been focused on low-risk women. So automatically the natural birth movement really excludes a large percent of the women. So automatically we're having a problem. So our trust is common knowledge that includes everyone. So you need to understand that the natural birth movement, if you have benefited from the natural birth movement and all you can think about is your birth, part of that is why we have a problem in the childbirth conversation. And we understand that. I'm not pregnant now. I'm not really focused on pregnancy and childbirth. I was when I was pregnant. I was when I was going to give birth. But really, as soon as my baby was born, I lost interest quite quickly in it. So we have a global phenomena, which is 100% of pregnant women will give birth, one way or the other. And we have a global phenomena, which is when we're not pregnant, we really don't care. And so we're only focused on our birth. And that's the biggest problem, because the natural birth movement is a one-to-one individual something, but it has never been inclusive of everyone. In fact, the natural birth movement in my lifetime, since the 70s onwards, has always been a very, very, very small group of people. So if I take everybody who's pregnant and look at the natural birth movement, you might have 0.000000001% of pregnant women who really are dedicated to the natural birth movement. Now, what's happened in the natural birth movement is that the ideal of a natural birth has been picked up by a lot of people. You can ask a lot of women, what kind of birth would you like? Oh, I want a natural birth. Okay, what does that mean? Well, and that's as far as they get. Well, what does it mean? So in the early 70s, when I gave birth in 1970, there was no real active natural birth movement. Curiously, there were 3 obstetricians, Lamaze, Bradley, and Grantley Dick Reed, who could see that the modern medical profession post-World War II was beginning to bring everybody in to the birth, into the hospital and stuff. And there was reasons why. It wasn't that the medical profession was running around with knives waiting to cut us open, as some people believe. It was because we knew globally throughout time and place that pregnancy, childbirth, and the newborn period produced greater risks than just living your life. Every culture knew that. That's why every culture's healthcare system focused a lot on pregnancy, what you can and cannot do. And honestly, if you've ever done research into traditional healthcare, all the systems are very sophisticated. You do not know how many prescribed behaviors there are until you've done the research, and most of you haven't done the research. I have. So I'm telling you that cultures around the world will tell pregnant women, you can do this, you can't do this, and it varies culture to culture. But it is broad and across the field of all behaviors, from sex to working to diet to clothing to thinking to saying to sitting to everything. In pregnancy, pregnant women, culture to culture, are encouraged or expected to do X, Y, and Z and not do A, B, and C. Around childbirth, honestly, there has been no research that I have done ever that shows any particular skills that are passed on, even within one cultural group, about how you manage birth. In fact, when I teach around the world in third world countries, and you ask a village that has been a village for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of generations, what did your mother teach you about how to breathe in labor? There's no answer. That didn't happen. But every mother taught every daughter 11 steps to make the same type of chapati or roti. So we have a problem. And when we ask people who are attending in traditional communities, what are your problems in birth? They only have 2 problems compared to the many problems that the modern maternity system sees. And those 2 problems are you can't get a baby out, or the mother bleeds too much. Because if you can't get a baby out, which they consider to be natural, and they consider it to be normal, and they consider it to be physiological, they just don't like it. Because if you can't get a baby out, the baby will die, and the mother may die. It's as simple as that. And if a woman bleeds too much, she's at risk of losing her life. And so people in third world countries where there's no medical care, they know that those are the 2 biggest things. You got to get a baby out, and you don't want a woman to bleed to death. So when we look at the natural birth movement, and I've been involved in childbirth for 50 years, at the beginning in the 1970s, when Lamaze and Bradley and Grantley Dick Reed, Lamaze in the United States, Bradley in the United States, and Canada, Grantley Dick Reed were our trustees in New Zealand. And I don't know what was happening in all the countries, modern countries around the world, but these guys were pretty famous. So they were basically saying to low-risk women that if you learned a set of skills, that you could achieve 3 goals: a natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical care. Not enough women achieved it because the words natural, natural birth, normal birth, physiological birth, those words have been co-opted by a natural birth movement and a certain way of thinking, because they've come to imply that birth is safe, it's easy, it has a good outcome. That's what we think of as natural birth. Women just instinctively know how to birth. They have a good time. Some of the lucky ones have a birth orgasm, and they're happy at the end of the birth. But that isn't what natural, normal, and physiological birth means around the world, and it's never been what it means around the world, because pregnancy, childbirth, and the newborn period are always perceived as high-risk parts of life. They're normal, but they involve issues in pregnancy, in birth, and after the baby's born, both to the mother and the baby. They don't mean easy. They don't mean good outcome. They don't mean that they lack problems. It means that anything that might happen could happen. And so you want to try to reduce risks from becoming problems, and you want to reduce problems from becoming tragedies. And that's why women around the world who attended birth, there are 2 tragedies where the baby didn't come out, and the baby and the mother died, and that a woman bled too much, and she could potentially die. So we have to understand that the natural birth movement took 3 words that meant something different, and they changed the meaning of those words. And then they sold the new meaning. And so everybody would like an easy birth and a great outcome and a wonderful experience, and to be able to just do it instinctively and to have that birth orgasm and to feel great after the birth. Everybody would like that. Every pregnant woman on the planet throughout time has wanted to have a safe birth for herself and her baby. That's what we want. And if we get more than that, we would like to have a positive birth. And a positive birth has tended to mean that we don't suffer in childbirth. And suffering in childbirth across the globe has never meant a problem. It has meant we lack skills to cope with the natural, normal, and physiological occurring labor pains that we have no control over. Some women find that they do have control because they discover for themselves, or now, since I gave birth in 1970, there are more skills that are taught. And Lamaze was the first skills-based method. It was the first childbirth preparation courses taught in the United States, and everybody learned skills. We didn't have choices. So to achieve a natural birth, the implication is that you learn those skills, and if you were low risk, you could more likely or not achieve those goals. But after a generation, not enough women did achieve those goals. And what was that in context to the modern maternity system in the 1970s? When I gave birth, there was a 4.5% cesarean rate, which meant 95% of us labored and had a vaginal birth because the medical profession wasn't sophisticated enough to deal with the many risks that were associated with pregnancy and birth. RhoGAM for Rh negative wasn't available until the 1980s. Breaches, twins, we just labored. Whether we labored for hours or days, whether we coped or suffered, whether our bodies were damaged or not, whether our babies came out fine or not. So you need to understand that when people in the natural birth movement say the cesarean rate's too high, the cesarean rate is high equivalent to modern women wanting to reduce risks for their pregnancy. And the natural birth movement, in some ways, I mean, in the 90s, the natural birth movement started to say forceps damage babies. Well, they do damage babies. So why are forceps used? Forceps are used because women haven't been taught the skills to prepare their body and to prepare their vagina so that when a big object comes down into the vagina and that tissue is tight, then the medical profession cuts it. And if the baby still can't come out because the vagina tissue is tight, they go in with forceps and extract the baby. And it can damage the baby. But why weren't women taught the skills to prepare their vaginas? Because the natural birth movement in my lifetime said we should retard the birth of the baby to let the woman's vagina stretch. Now, did I think that was a good idea or not? Well, very early on in the early 1970s, we started to prepare the vagina, not the perineal massage, which only is a small portion, but we prepared all of the soft tissue in the vagina because grapefruit was coming out. And so we knew right away that if you spent 5 minutes a day for 8 weeks and really prepared all the tension in the vagina and let the birth hormones soften that tissue more, that the baby would open us up and not have to stretch us. And that the baby would come out with less trauma to itself and to our bodies. But the natural birth movement believed that women just naturally stretch. And so they said, delay, don't let women push too much, and just delay the birth. But the baby's trying to come out because it needs to breathe. And I didn't know whether they were accurate or not until I saw 3 birth videos. A lot of birth videos were done in the 70s and 80s with babies that had died from delaying their birth because they wanted the woman to stretch naturally. So what do we have? We have a problem. We have a problem with the idea. So the idea in the natural birth movement is that birth is fine. It's really a nothing burger. The women have always given birth, so we know how to birth, and that we should just be left alone to discover birth. And there is an illusion from the natural birth movement that birth throughout time and place in all the cultures around the world was a nothing burger. And they always used to throw around the example. Women used to birth by a rice paddy and get back up and work. Yes, some women did. Some women birth in the back of a taxi or in the parking lot of a hospital. But that doesn't mean that that's the majority of women. And nor does that mean that woman preferred that. So when we go back very early on to the ideas of the natural birth movement, those ideas, led by these 3 physicians, started the problems that we have today. And our trust and my voice has been a voice in the wilderness, because way back then, I started to say, we are having a problem with this. We have a choice. We can include all pregnant women, because all pregnant women have to give birth. Every pregnant woman is doing the activity of birthing her baby by herself, no matter if there are 100 people in the room. And if we do not see that as an activity rather than something that happens or just instinctively unfolds or something like that, then we automatically have a problem. Because if we just focus on risks, then we're assuming that a low-risk woman is going to have a low-risk birth and that her baby's low risk, which may not be accurate, right? So we went through a period of time in the trust where we were inundated by pregnancy yoga teachers who were all having cesareans. And they were saying to us individually, why did that happen? Because I'm a yoga teacher, I'm very, very flexible. You're flexible on the outside, but that doesn't mean that your tissue on the inside is mobile. Nor does it mean that the yoga breathing that you're learning when you're not in pain is going to work when you are in pain. Nor does it have any relationship to how big your baby is relative to your pelvis and how easily it can come out, or whether your baby has a problem or whether you develop a problem. So the reality is, back then, in the early 70s, when the natural birth movement started to form through Lamaze, Bradley, and Grantley Dick Reed, we knew there was a problem. Because society was either going to include everybody, all pregnant women, or it was going to include this percent of women that were perceived of as low risk. So back then, a woman having a breech baby was considered to be low risk. It was considered to be risky, but it wasn't necessarily considered to be a high risk. It is now. And it is now because women demanded those risks be dealt with. And so the medical profession has responded by doing more assessments, monitoring, and procedures. And because we know more. And so back then, what I was saying and what our trust started to say in the 90s and what the families I worked with in the early 70s and 80s said is 100% of pregnant women are going to do this activity with the baby, and it is best for us all to be skilled. The Lamaze, the Bradley, and Grantley Dick Reed techniques were the beginning. So we should expect anything in the beginning to have to evolve. But instead of evolving, the next group of natural birth advocates, the famous ones, the ones that really influenced not the local, not the regional, not the country conversation about birth, but it became a global conversation, partly because of the World Health Organization started to ask questions about birth, about traditional birth attendants. These were questions that began to arise, and the natural birth movement wanted to have a voice because the rest of women were not going to organize. How do you organize a group of high-risk women? How do you organize a group of individuals who aren't pregnant at the same time? It's not like January 1st, everybody's going to be pregnant, gets pregnant, and they all have a baby 9 months later. It's a rolling machine of pregnant women that come and go. So it's very easy to focus on ourselves as individuals and not see the bigger picture. But we could see the bigger picture right away because when I gave birth, there was a very high societal expectation that we all attend the first childbirth preparation classes, which were all skills, Lamaze. And so we all did. And so what we saw is that multiple millions of women went into a hospital environment where there were no choices, where we had the assessments, monitoring procedures, and yet we all behaved better. We didn't suffer as much. So those skills, as insufficient as they were, as undeveloped as they were successful for many, 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 many women to at least cope better, to manage better, to work through, to deal with, to handle, to be able to cope, and to be able to stay on top of and feel in control of the natural, normal, physiological, occurring, really intense pain of labor contractions. So skills worked. They just didn't work for those three narrow goals. And when a woman is told, use skills to have a pain-free labor, and her labor isn't pain-free, what happens? Well, she stops using the skills. So the families that developed Birthing Better, we went and just said, use the skills anyway. You can't stop the pain. You can change the word to rush. It's painful. You can change the word to wave. It's painful. You can try to kind of euphemism, because natural birth movement said you can't use the word pain. It would scare people. Well, you have to be real with people. So if people are going to have a lot of pain, wouldn't you like them to know how to cope with it better? Well, common sense says yes. Common knowledge or trust says yes. But the natural birth movement said no. It said, we know instinctively how to birth. And that became a whole question. Just because we're pregnant, do we know how to birth? Just because we're horny, do we become good lovers? Just because we're hungry, do we know how to cook? No. Just because we're hungry, we don't even know if we go to another environment what foods are safe for us to eat. We do not, as human beings, instinctively know what is safe and what is poisonous. And we know that because we spend years taking things out of our kids' mouths. So if it was instinctive, it would come at birth. And it doesn't come at birth. We have to be taught what foods are safe. If we get horny, if we expect to be a good lover, it's illusionary. We have to learn to be a good lover. So, and birth is less frequent. And it lasts longer. How many people make love for 3 hours? Very few. How many of them make love for 12 hours, which is the sort of the average of a second birth, or 24 hours, or 36 hours for a first birth? None of us do. None of us are hungry that long. None of us are cooking for that long. So birth is naturally and normally and physiologically, if you labor, unique. It's infrequent. It's a one-off. You can't replay it. The memories last for a lifetime, and it's life transforming, because after the birth, you have to parent a kid for years, right? And we don't instinctively know how to parent, right? We don't instinctively know how to breastfeed, right? So we have to learn these things, and learning means we have to learn skills. So from the early 70s, the natural birth movement created an illusion that they were very public about creating, right? And we as consumers bought into the message. And the message was, at first in the 70s, that if you learn these skills and you're low risk, you could achieve these three goals: natural birth, pain-free labor, no medical interventions. Then it became skills aren't important. Cows and cats aren't taught to birth. Women don't need to be taught to birth. They just need to be left alone. We need choices. And we did need choices. Of course we needed choices. But what kind of choices did we need? That's never been resolved. Because if we say we don't want women to have medical assessments, monitoring, and procedures, I can tell you from having spent years in traditional communities, they want those things because they have issues in pregnancy, birth, and after the birth, and they want modern medical care, antibiotics, immunization, just like they want running water in their house, flush toilets, refrigeration, electricity. Why would anybody not want those things? And why, if you believe that birth is so natural and normal, to even direct entry midwives go to school for years? What is this? So we're giving inaccurate information. And because we're giving an inaccurate philosophy, everything stems from that. So if the natural birth movement has a statement, what it really wants you to know is what the statement that backs the New Zealand midwifery model of care, which is absolutely brilliant and dysfunctional because of this. It is based on pregnancy and childbirth or normal life events that rarely require medical care. And we take that as though that's gospel truth. But we don't think about it. And we need to think about it. We need to think about it. And that's why I've decided once COVID came out that I would get back out there and try to explain this to people. Because if I didn't explain it to people, we would never know what's wrong with childbirth today. So, and you will see this, I will say this over and over again throughout these series, because we're going to talk about everything, and everything gets overlaid with the messages, with the words, with the actions. So if we start off with a premise that pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events that rarely require medical care, then let's test that as a thinking. So if we take 1,000 childbearing women and shove them in a room together, how many of those women are going to have health issues? A lot. How many may have substance abuse or be abused by their family member? If we look globally, how many of those women are living in a war or in famine or in a refugee camp? How many women have more kids than they ever wanted? How many women don't want this baby or want this baby, they're not pregnant, sorry. They're not pregnant yet. So how many women have health issues, financial issues, psychological, emotional issues of those 1,000 childbearing women? A lot. So pregnancy is a normal physiological natural event of which many women already have medical care if they are living in a country. So you can't separate these things collectively or individually. So if those same women then just look all pregnant, some of their health issues go away. Some get worse. New ones crop up. There are health issues with the baby that can happen. So when we make a statement that pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events that rarely require medical care, we're wrong. That's inaccurate right away. That's inaccurate right away. It's inaccurate right away. So if we build words and systems on an inaccuracy, then you should expect failures left, right, and center, which is what we have. Because if you look at pregnancy only from those pre-pregnant women who have no health issues, then they go into pregnancy and have no health issues, then your assumption is that small group of people will have no issues in childbirth, and that's inaccurate. And why didn't you continue it beyond that, right, into parenting? Because it's inaccurate, right? So pregnancy and childbirth are normal, natural, physiological life events of which anything that can happen might happen, but it may not happen to you, right? It's not that it doesn't require medical care. It's that we get pregnant, our pregnancy will end in some sort of a birth, whether it is an abortion, whether it is a miscarriage, or whether it is a birth. That is 100% guaranteed. So if you take those same pregnant women and then they're all giving birth, there can be many issues that come up from suffering, the women don't cope, from laboring for days, from starting to bleed, from the baby coming out, but it had a short cord or it had a long cord, or it had a problem with the placenta and it had a partial asphyxia, or it died, or the woman bled, or she tore a little bit or a lot. And, we cannot know what birth is going to be like. So the medical profession dealt with birth in a simple fashion. It's safe after the fact. The natural birth movement dealt with it before and said it's safe until proven otherwise. But how do you know? And that's where the assessments, monitoring procedures came in. But so when I gave birth in 1970, there was an evidence-based practice at the time. When I gave birth in 82, same country, different evidence-based practice. Partly that was true because multiple millions of women in 1970 used skills. So our behavior changed how obstetricians and labor and delivery nurses focused on birth. Sadly, those skills were targeted to low-risk women to achieve a natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical care, which meant that the hundreds and thousands of labor and delivery nurses and obstetricians didn't focus on the bigger issue, which the less women suffered, because it was focusing on low-risk labor and delivery and a good outcome. And this has always been the problem. From the start, this has been the problem. And I've decided to do this talk before I go into the others, because in talks 1, 2, and 3, I started to talk about the failures in the natural birth movement. And I can tell that I'm not going to continue to talk longer. I'm going to do a next one, because we have to understand this. The original premise of the natural birth movement, that women throughout time and space birthed fine, is inaccurate. You can sit there and go, okay, but most did. That's not the issue. The issue is that 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth. And we as women to each other have to either decide we are going to include all of us, or we're only going to include the ones we like, okay? So how many women get their baby out and don't suffer? Less than you think, okay? A lot of women don't like birth, feel they suffered, felt out of control. Many more women suffered than women had problems. So instead of dealing with the bigger issue, people dealt with the low-risk issue. But risks have changed over time, because when I gave birth, women who had twins were considered low enough risks to labor and have a vaginal birth, or a breech birth, or a partial placenta preva, or a woman who had diabetes. We were considered low enough risk to labor and have a vaginal birth and hope that there wasn't a poor outcome. So we need to understand from back dot, when the natural birth movement began to formulate its ideas, it really only wanted to talk about a small percent of women. And this has always been a problem, because too many women now have been left traumatized by their birth because they failed to achieve that natural birth. Now, I teach a lot of workshops, and as the director of Common Knowledge Trust, and you can find us at commonknowledgetrust.org or birthingbetter.org. Now it's online. If you want to get workshops together, please do, because we know how to change this now. We know how to grow a skilled birthing population for everybody. We know the message that all birth workers need to give their clients. We know how to do this, and we need to do it by our trust, educating you in the ideas and the language and the actions you take. The same way with pregnant women. If you're pregnant now, it's normal and natural to learn birth skills and birth coaching skills in pregnancy that you'll use during your birth, because it's an activity you're doing with your baby, and you will birth better. You won't suffer as much. You'll feel in control. You'll manage. You'll cope. You'll deal with. You'll stay on top of it and feel better about your birth if you use some level of skills. So I'm going to wrap up this section now, but I want to give you a poignant understanding of why the natural birth movement fails, because they say you can birth without, now it's called medical interventions. So when I ask natural birth advocates, what is stopping women from having more natural births? They're blunt about it, interventions. And the implication is that it's the medical profession causing this. So if the medical profession just did not do these interventions on women that are obviously unnecessary, obviously imposed on women, then women will achieve this instinctive birth. So I want you to see a list of interventions. There they are, okay? That's the list. That's the list. 30 things. Women have to avoid these 30 things in order to achieve a natural birth. Is this realistic? Is this inclusive of enough of us so that we can have a positive birth experience and not suffer? And maybe be able to reduce or prevent risks from becoming problems or problems from becoming tragedies. We can't do this. And as women, we've been pushing this, and we have to stop as women. This is unrealistic, and I'm going to keep talking about this, honestly, until I empty my thoughts out, and then I'll go on to the rest of the series, because this is damaging us in our societies. It's damaging us as women. It's damaging our families. It's damaging our expectations, and it's damaging how we view our children. So if I then ask midwives, what is your ideal birth? If you believe that these interventions are stopping women from having natural birth, what's your ideal birth? And this is what they say, okay? That's their ideal birth. So this is a midwifery profession that serves 98% of the women in half her generation. So even the women in that country are up against this. And this is why that system is a failure. It's not that women don't love having a continuity care midwife. Who wouldn't? We all, across the board, everybody would love to have the same person see us in pregnancy and be at our birth. Honestly, we don't care about after the birth. That's for a short period of time. What do we want after the birth? We want somebody to cook and clean and shop and take care of the kids, do the laundry, and help us. That's why if we're going to have doulas, they should all be postpartum doulas as far as I'm concerned, because that's really where women want help. Because part of the natural birth movement, which I'll get to in another session about this, changed fathers' roles. We wanted our husbands there to help us. We wanted them to coach us in the 70s. But the natural birth movement said women shouldn't be coached. Birth is instinctive. Women know how to birth, so fathers should just support women's choices and protect the sacred space of labor. And they were on and on about how women have to be safe in the sacred space. Where is their illusion? Where is it? Were women in Syria safe during the war? Honestly, what are you thinking about? You're modern women in a modern community. Do you think every woman, even in modern communities, feels safe in their homes? It's nuts to think that, right? And some women just want a break because they want to go to the hospital and not have to cook for their 5 or 20 other children. So we have just fed ourselves as women absolute nonsense. And my job now in COVID is to really confront the nonsense, because there's a way forward. And the way forward is so bloody easy. And that is for every birth worker to just say to women, look, honey, you are going to have your baby one day. It's an activity you got to do, right? You'll do that activity better with a set of skills. And here's a handout of the skills-based methods I know. Pick one or more, and from 24 weeks onward, every month and every 2 weeks and every week, we'll just mark down. You learn breathing, you learn relaxation, you learn communication, you learn how to deal with pain when you didn't like it, you learned how to be okay about being, whatever you say. And then at your birth, if your choices unfold, or if you lack them, or if your choices change, you still have to do the activity. And if you look like you're coping and managing, we're going to praise you. And if you look like you're overwhelmed, or your partner isn't helping you as much as they can, we can refer to the notes. And if I'm not there, someone else can, and say, oh, you learned breathing and relaxation. Oh, I said I did, but I didn't. I didn't really think I needed it. Okay, well, you have to deal with that. But if you said, yes, I did, but I feel that birth has changed now, so I don't feel I should be using the skills, birth workers just say, no, it's your baby's birth. You're doing this activity. You got pregnant to have a baby. So we can change this very quickly. We just need to know why we're changing it. And we're changing it because we want 100% of pregnant women to have the opportunity to birth better. They may not have a better birth, but we want to birth better. We want that for our societies. We have to want that for each other. Why should I, who've had the easiest births in the world, just spit them out? Everything was just fine. I'm the perfect example of a natural birth person. Why should I devalue myself because I had elective cesareans? Because I chose them for no other reason that I didn't want to have any pain. Why should I devalue that? Or why should I devalue my birth? Because my birth became complex. And even though I wanted natural birth, I decided for the well-being of myself or my babies to have every type of medical care ever. Or why should I devalue my birth? Because I just wanted medical care. I wanted to trust my doctor and my midwife. Why should I devalue my son? Because my son was born by cesarean and my daughter was born at a home birth. Why should I elevate the home birth over the cesarean? Why should I do that? So this looks like I'm going to go on another time about this more because it's so important and you're important. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please pass this on. Please join us. If you're a birth worker, please get in touch with us. Let us help you change the childbirth conversation and begin to grow a skilled birthing population. We can do this with concentrated effort within a year or two. That's it. I've spent 50 years. We know what happens when individual birth workers change what they're saying to their clients. They can say, I support your choices. Bravo. And they have to say, you're going to do the activity of birthing your baby. Only you can do it. You need to learn some skills and use your skills. And the reason we're recording them is so we can help you use them, not necessarily do them with you, but encourage their use. Because at the moment, there's no societal expectation that women use skills or that fathers know how to birth coach. And this is damaging families, and it's damaging women. We have to stop. Okay, I'm going to get off now. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening. And you'll find us on Facebook here. This is live on Facebook. You'll find us at YouTube at Birthing Better 1. And please just help us finally heal the childbirth conversation that just got off on a wrong track.